Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you're interested in and, well, we pull out the most important and fascinating bits.
Exactly. It's a way to get up to speed quickly without feeling overwhelmed by, all the detail.
Think of it as your fast track to being really informed.
You give us the material, we guide you through the highlights.
Okay, so today we're diving into Mughal Caravanserais, specifically in northwest Pakistan. This is based on some excerpts from Architecture and Identity, the occupation, use, and reuse of Mughal Caravanserais.
Right. And if you're the listener who suggested this, chances are you're interested in history, architecture, and maybe how places get used and reused over time.
Yeah, how their meaning can shift. So, our mission today, we want to understand what these structures were like, their form and function back in the Mughal era.
And then, crucially, how they were used later on, how they were reinterpreted. We'll focus on two main examples, Khuttree Sarai in Peshawar and Pakakampur Sarai.
Now, it's worth mentioning, historical stuff can sometimes touch on politically charged topics, but we're going to stick strictly to reporting the information in the source material here, just laying out the facts and the analysis provided impartially.
Absolutely. Our focus is on the architecture, the use, the identity shifts described in the text.
Okay, great. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly were these caravanserais?
Well, basically, they were rest houses. You'd find them along the main transit routes in South Asia.
Okay, like motels on ancient highways.
Sort of, yeah, but often much more substantial. And while there were earlier versions, the ones built during the Mughal period, that's roughly the 16th to 18th centuries, were a really significant development.
So they became more important or more developed during Mughal times?
Definitely more developed and absolutely central to the empire. They were crucial for trade, for travel, for moving goods and people across huge distances.
Right. Makes sense.
And interestingly, they weren't just out in the countryside. Many were actually inside cities, too, acting as hubs for merchants and travelers.
So if you were a traveler arriving, what would you find? What were the key things inside?
Water was essential, of course. So you'd almost always find a well, either right in the central courtyard or very nearby, for people and animals.
Okay, water, number one. What else?
Well, this is interesting here. Emperor Jahangir, he's credited with introducing public baths, hammams, inside some of the sarais.
Hammams, inside the rest stop.
Yeah. It offered a bit more comfort, and that became more common in the later ones.
I can imagine that was pretty welcome after a long journey. What about the structure itself? What did they generally look like?
The classic Islamic design usually had a big open courtyard in the middle.
Okay.
And enclosing that courtyard was a strong perimeter wall. Lining the inside of that wall were lots of individual rooms or cells for travelers to stay in and to keep their goods safe.
Got it. A secure compound, essentially, with rooms around a central space. Now, thinking bigger picture, the Mughal Empire, how did these buildings fit into their sort of imperial image?
Oh, they were hugely important for that. Mughal buildings in general, mosques, forts, tombs, and yes, caravanserais, they were all designed to impress, to show the greatness, the wealth, the power, and even the piety of the rulers.
So they were statements.
Absolutely. Tangible statements of imperial authority dotted all across the empire.
Like physical markers saying, the Mughals are here and they're powerful.
Precisely. Especially given how mobile the Mughal court was. The emperor traveled a lot with a huge entourage. These sarais provided the necessary infrastructure.
Right, practical support for the moving court.
But they were also permanent structures. So even when the emperor wasn't there, the building itself was a constant reminder of Mughal rule.
The source mentions something called monumental vernacular architecture. Can you unpack that a bit? It sounds kind of academic.
Yeah, it's a useful idea, though. It basically means structures that serve everyday people, like travelers needing a place to stay, but that also carry bigger meanings. They embody collective memories, shared identities.
Okay, so functional, but also symbolic.
Exactly. Caravanserais are a great example because they were used by lots of ordinary people. But their scale, their presence, sometimes their decoration, all reflected the power of the empire. They became part of the landscape, part of the collective memory.
So even if you never met the emperor, you interacted with these symbols of his rule.
Right. And that helps explain why later rulers often took them over and adapted them, rather than just knocking them down. They held meaning.
That makes sense. They were more than just buildings. Okay, let's zoom in on one. Khuttree Sarai in Peshawar. Why is this one significant?
Well, Peshawar itself is historically vital. A major trading city, a crossroads for centuries.
A gateway city.
Exactly. And Khuttree Sarai, which was originally called Sarai Jahanabad, was built during Shah Jahan's reign. Importantly, it was commissioned by his daughter, Jahan Ara Begum.
Ah, imperial patronage right from the top. That signals importance.
It really does. And it tells us something about the role high-status women could play in commissioning major architectural works.
What did it originally look like? What do we know about its Mughal form?
From what remains and historical descriptions, it was pretty big. A rectangle, roughly 193 meters by 164 meters.
Wow, that's large.
Yeah, substantial. Built with a typical Mughal brick and lime mortar, which is known for being very durable. That's partly why elements survive.
And the layout. You mentioned the courtyard and cells earlier.
Yes, picture that large central courtyard, enclosed by a single-story wall, and all along the inside of that wall, a row of identical cells for lodging and storage. Very regular, very organized.
How did people get in and out?
There were two main gates, big ones, set in the middle of the east and west walls. The source suggests the south wall probably had a false gate, looked like a gate but wasn't functional, likely just for architectural balance.
The symmetry.
Right. And the north wall, though it's gone now, probably had one too. Plus, at the corners, you had these prominent octagonal towers, or bastions, added to the imposing look and likely defensibility.
Quite a structure. What was going on inside the main courtyard?
It wasn't just empty space, it was the active center. There's a major mosque, a Jami Masjid, for Friday prayers, also commissioned by Jahan Ara Begum.
Okay, a mosque.
Also a hammam, those baths we talked about, and at least two wells for water. So it was really a self-contained complex for travelers.
A whole little world inside those walls. Now the name, Khuttree. That doesn't sound Mughal. Where did that come from?
That change reflects the later history. The Sarai went through major transformations after the Mughal period. The source mentions the Durrani period briefly, but the big shift came during the Sikh period, especially under a governor named General Avatabil in the 1800s.
Avatabil. How did things change under him? It sounds like its use shifted significantly.
Dramatically. He basically took over the Sarai and used it as his main base for governing Peshawar, his headquarters.
So it went from a traveler's rest stop to an administrative center.
Exactly. We have accounts from European travelers at the time who noted he ruled the city from there. And Avatabil himself is a controversial figure. Some saw him as relatively fair, others as incredibly brutal.
So the building's use reflects his rule.
In a way, yes. For instance, he actually had jail cells built within the Sarai complex for holding prisoners.
Wow, okay. So adding a penal function. Did anything of the old function remain?
Interestingly, yes. The hammam, the bathhouse, apparently kept operating, and it was used by both men and women, just at different times of the day.
That's surprising.
It is. It shows how these spaces could hold multiple, even contradictory functions at the same time. It wasn't just about takeover. It was layering new uses onto the old ones, giving the place new meaning while appropriating its existing significance.
Then the British arrived. What did they do with this already layered space?
They added more layers. During the British colonial period, they built a city mission house inside the Sarai. Accounts differ slightly on whether it was the northeast or northwest corner.
A mission house. Another total shift in purpose.
Right. Using the space for religious and social outreach, from their perspective. And for a time, part of the Sarai, likely the northeast section, was used as a Zenana women's hospital, probably linked to the mission's activities.
Okay, healthcare too.
And they didn't just repurpose existing cells. The British actually built new structures within the main courtyard, physically altering the original Mughal plan to suit their own needs and presence.
So constantly being adapted and changed. What about after independence? What's its status now?
Well, since Pakistani independence, it's entered another phase. It's become a site for archaeological work, conservation projects, and restoration, trying to understand and preserve its complex past.
It's incredible, one building holding so much history. Now, the source contrasts this with Pakka Kanpur Sarai. What's its story?
Pakka Kanpur offers a really interesting counterpoint. It was a rural sarai, located on the route between Lahore and Kabul, a key highway.
Okay, not in a major city like Khuttree.
Right, and its fate was quite different. While Khuttree was continuously occupied and repurposed by successive powers, Pakka Kanpur seems to have been largely abandoned as a major sarai when trade routes shifted, especially after the British consolidated control.
Abandoned. So what happened to it? Did it just fall into ruin?
Not exactly. It transformed in a different way. Over time, it essentially became an enclosed village. Local people moved in.
Moved into the old sarai.
Yes, they built their houses directly into the old walls within the courtyard. Today, the original sarai structure is kind of woven into the fabric of this living village. You've got houses using the old perimeter walls, plus a mosque, even a saint's tomb inside what used to be the sarai courtyard.
That's fascinating. So it became part of the local community organically.
In a way, yes, a more bottom-up reuse compared to the top-down appropriation seen at Khuttree.
Were there architectural differences between the two originally?
Yes, some notable ones mentioned in the source. The design of the cells wasn't quite the same, nor were the gates identical.
For instance,
Well, Pakakampur has evidence of an inscription over its north gate, possibly a dedication, which isn't found at Khuttree. The corner bastions that survive at Pakakampur also show more details like internal rooms, stairs, parapets, drainage systems.
Suggesting maybe a slightly different function or construction standard?
Possibly, or maybe reflecting its more rural location. The source also notes there might have been stone used in the lower parts of Pakakampur's walls, unlike the predominantly brick Khuttree. Little differences that hinted variations based on location or perhaps time period.
Right. So even within the category Mughal Caravanserai, there was variation.
Definitely. It wasn't a single monolithic template. They adapted to local conditions and needs.
So looking at both Khuttree and Pakakampur, what are the big takeaways about reuse, memory, identity?
I think Khuttree really shows how adaptable architecture can be. Its function changed so many times. Rest house, administrative center, jail, mission house, hospital, archaeological site. It proves a building's use isn't fixed.
The physical form allows for many interpretations.
Exactly. And each phase of reuse adds another layer to the collective memory of that place. New users bring their own identity, their own meaning, and impress it onto the structure.
The building becomes a sort of historical document itself.
Precisely. The Sikhs, the British, they deliberately took over this existing significant Mughal structure. It was a way to assert their own power, to embed themselves in the narrative of the place.
Appropriation as a tool of power.
Yes. And it doesn't necessarily erase the earlier meanings, but it transforms them, recontextualizes them. And even today, the plans for restoration, maybe a museum, maybe a hotel at Khuttree, that's still a process of negotiating the site's value and meaning.
A continuous conversation with the past. And Pakakampur shows a different kind of transformation, right?
Right. More of an organic integration into a local community after its imperial function faded. It shows how these places can live on, not just as monuments, but as part of people's everyday lives and memories, shaped by local forces rather than just central powers.
So pulling it all together then, Mughal Caravanserais. They weren't just roadside stops.
Not at all. They were vital infrastructure for trade, travel, communication. They were powerful symbols of Mughal authority.
And as Khuttree and Pakakampur show so clearly, they were incredibly adaptable spaces, constantly reused, reinterpreted by different people, different powers, reflecting shifting identities and becoming repositories of layered memory.
Absolutely. Which leads to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on.
Okay.
Think about the buildings around you, even the ones that seem ordinary. How many layers of history, how many different identities might be embedded in them? What stories could their changing shapes and uses tell, if we really looked?
That's a great point. History isn't just in museums. It can be built into the fabric of the places we see every day. If you want to explore this more, you could definitely look into Mughal architecture generally, or the impact of colonialism on historic sites.
And the source mentioned a website for more on caravanserais in general. Consider it caravanserai.net. Might be worth a look.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.